Welcome to New York Nonprofit Media. I'm here in the CEO corner with Nancy Wackstein, who is the Executive Director of United Neighborhood Houses, 38 houses all over New York City, and you've been Executive Director since 2002, right? Stepping down from that position in a few months, which is yet to be decided, but this is a great time to have you in, sort of reflecting on your time with UNH and also obviously your expansive career in nonprofit world and the government side of things here in New York. So maybe if we could start with just an overview of what UNH does.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jeff. And since I'm leaving before the end of the year, I can be brutally honest.
Exactly.
United Neighborhood Houses is the Federation Association of 38 settlement houses and community centers. These are multi-service, community-based nonprofits serving multiple generations. We used to say from cradle to grave, meaning from very young people, preschool, to very old people, and everybody in between. And our agencies are, in general, pretty, I think, well known in their communities. Places like Henry Street Settlement and Union Settlement and Project Hospitality and Cypress Hills. I mean, these are organizations that are firmly rooted in their communities. I think I'll get into trouble by naming some and not all of them.
I don't know if we have time for all 30, unfortunately.
But, you know, it's been a real privilege for me to lead this association because I know how important the work is and how hard the job of leading these organizations is. For 11 years before I was at UNH, United Neighborhood Houses, I was the executive director of one of the agencies, Lenox Hill Neighborhood House on the Upper East Side. So I have extraordinary respect for the job that these agencies do in their communities and how difficult it is. You know, these are organizations that are funded typically through a combination of city, state, sometimes federal contracts, private fundraising, sometimes earned income. Putting all those pieces together to have a functioning organization is really hard because working on behalf of the government is not always easy because there's lots of accountability requirements and regulatory requirements and fiscal requirements and reporting requirements, and sometimes you wonder really if the government is your partner or is your, you know, terrible overseer or whatever, but we forge ahead and try to make that partnership with the government, particularly city and state government for us, meaningful and productive and a true partnership. But I can tell you it's a challenge.
Yeah, what insight have you taken from your time, obviously serving in a couple of different mayoral administrations, reflecting on that specific challenge, and also I would love to get your thoughts about the philanthropy foundation side of the nonprofit world. It's a very interesting interaction between these three actors in the space.
Yeah. Well, sure. I mean, I think starting with the philanthropic sector, I think that also is a very challenging relationship. First of all, you have funders, donors who have their point of view, and they are the controlling party in most of the interactions. So there's a power differential between funders and the nonprofits who are supplicants, if you will, or who are, I think the foundation community typically likes to call us partners and talks about investments in nonprofit work, but it's not always equal. And I think one of the hardest things, and I can tell you to a person, if you talk to our executive directors, the thing that they would say they need most is sort of general operating support, unrestricted funding, and it's very hard to get. Most philanthropic organizations, foundations, have particular guidelines and have particular priorities, and so you often, on our side, on the nonprofit side, have to really pretzel yourself into meeting this year's priority. Right. I think, like with ice cream flavors, there are fads in funding. And so you, in your quest to keep to sustain your organization, you fit yourself into what this year's priorities are. And I don't think that's the right way to do business, right, and to support essential social services. I mean, we're not talking here for our agencies about supporting, fluff. We're talking about essential services like childcare, like after school, like senior care. So I often think there's something wrong with this picture. Either the government, through its contracting, should support 100% of the cost of providing these services, or the philanthropic sector should make up for what the government doesn't do, and that doesn't happen. I mean, I'm concerned about the business model, frankly, the nonprofit business model. I mean, I'm not sure about how cultural groups and environmental groups fall out on this, but I can talk about social service groups, right, that there's a real challenge in making it work, especially if you want to be multi-service and meet the needs of your neighborhood, which are constantly changing. You need flexible funding, right, period. And government funding's not flexible. Typically, philanthropic funding's not flexible. So that's why so many of us have these big dinner dances and galas and things like that. That's where your flexible money comes from. That's where, if you look in the New York Times style section, I guess City and State doesn't have a style section yet, or maybe it should. And you see, these endless, black tie dinners and things like that. I mean, why do people have those? Because they need flexible money to support, fixing the elevator and paying Con Ed, the non-sexy things. Right. It's easy to find a donor who wants to fund an early childhood class. Well, not so easy, but it's easier to find a donor who wants to fund an early childhood classroom with cute little children, but it's harder to find a donor who wants to pay the Con Ed bill.
Yeah, I sort of going along the same theme. How much of your organization's time, resources, would you say is devoted to measuring outcomes and sort of doing the work that you're talking about, trying to jump through all of the regulatory hoops and also meet all of the requirements of funders, both on government and philanthropy side?
Well, no, we ourselves at United Neighborhood Houses, we don't operate with government contracts. We do a lot of advocacy and policy work related to city and state government. So we, as a policy, don't accept government contracts, and plus we don't want to compete with our members. So the question probably is more aptly directed to the direct service providers, the agencies in the communities, and I would say that they spend a lot of time on compliance issues and regulatory compliance, because let's say you're an agency and you're 90% supported by government contracts. That means each of those government contracts has its own fiscal audit, its own program audit. It has its own monthly reporting on, so there's a lot of work involved in making our model work, our multi-service model work. I have to say that in the Bloomberg administration, actually Deputy Mayor at the time, Linda Gibbs, paid a lot of attention to trying to streamline the contracting process for human services nonprofits, and came up with something called HHS Accelerator, which Health and Human Services Accelerator, which was to create more of a central data vault so that you wouldn't have to each year for each contract submit your audit, submit your board of directors list, submit your Vendex. Maybe I'm getting too in the weeds here, but and so I think there's been some progress made. It's not a streamlined system. I mean, this is 2015, and you can use your cell phone to do pretty much anything, but you can't use your cell phone to submit documents to the city government when you're a contractor. I mean, I heard a story the other day where one of our agencies in the Bronx, the executive director had to go down and sign a contract in person. Right. So that, of course, was half a day, right? Which I was stunned by. I said, you know, like, can't you send an electronic signature? No, you had to go down there. Another one of our agencies told me that they had 10 different contracts with one of the city agencies, and each one they were required to submit the same set of documents. So that doesn't make sense. Right. in this digital age. So I'm hoping that city and state government will continue to look at this. I know the state government is doing it. Fran Barrett is up there now trying to streamline contracting, but it's, you know, it's a significant cost of doing business. Let me put it that way. And as I said, on the philanthropic side as well, I mean, there are high transaction costs. If you get a $10,000 grant from a foundation, you typically have to do a 6-month report, and you have to do an end-of-the-year report and proposal. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of transaction to get these grants. And you know, I don't want to sound like an ingrate about it, but I think it's just. It's hard to keep one of these agencies going. I mean, as I said, first thing, I'm a big admirer of people who run nonprofit organizations, because it's a really complicated job. It's really, you know, one of the things I bristle at most and have over the years is when, you know, people from the corporate world, the for-profit world, as we call it, you know, come and tell us what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. And I'm saying, well, you know, we're actually doing a better job than they are with fewer resources, right? You know, we don't have up-to-date technology. We don't have, like, we can't buy the latest human resources packages, you know, but we managed to do it. And we don't typically have, you know, Enron and Tyco and imploding. Yeah. I mean, we've had a few, but not as much as the corporate world. So I always say we should export our knowledge to the corporate world. Maybe they could do as well as we do.
It seems like another sort of systemic problem in terms of the overall business model, as it were, of trying to keep a nonprofit afloat is the struggle of the unfunded mandates. I would love to get your thoughts about that concept generally, why it needs, you know, revisiting from various levels of government. I was just reading about another piece of legislation that passed that mandates a workplace violence prevention program for any nonprofit that gets 50% or more of its funding from the government. You know, obviously not funded by the government. So it seems like these costs continue to add up.
Right, which is why a lot of nonprofits have to supplement their government contracts through private fundraising, which is just, it's not great. I mean, you know, look, unequivocally, I would say government should pay 100% of the costs. And one of the things that was a really disturbing trend over the last several years was that if you applied for government funding, I'll use the Administration for Children's Services Early Learn program, which is the child care program for very young children. If you were going to apply for that funding, there was a private match requirement. You had to put in, I think it was 6.7% of the overall cost of the. Why is that? What? I mean, if you know, the common response to that is, oh, if you have a contract with the city to paint a bridge, does the city ask you to put in a private match? You know, I don't think any contractor in the world is going to step up for that deal. Now maybe it's our fault because we do step up for those deals, but I would say it's an equivalent issue. Why should there be a private match requirement to do a government-funded program? Either you want a quality program or you don't. And you know what that does? It also helps create the tale of two cities in the nonprofit sector. I've said this to city officials. You know, Mayor de Blasio ran on a Tale of Two Cities platform. In the nonprofit, we have a Tale of Two Cities as well. And guess what? The small agency in East New York, you know, can't raise the kind of money that an agency on the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side of Manhattan can. So you are, you know, you're creating inequality in your nonprofit, and so it's really a problem because many of the neediest neighborhoods in the city, East New York, Brownsville, places in the South Bronx, are served by agencies that don't have the ability to raise huge amounts of private money like some of the other Manhattan-based agencies can. So the poorest people are going to end up with the poorest services, right? So it perpetuates that kind of inequality. So without question, I think the city needs to fund 100% of contracts. It needs to fund, when they ask us to install new technology in order to report to them, they should pay for that. When they should pay for administrative, what I call essential administrative costs. You know, we pay health insurance for our employees when we're employers. We're not just do-gooders, we're also employers, and we want to treat our employees fairly. So when health care costs go up 10% a year, which they had been, the city should cover that. That's not some, again, I'll use the word fluff, that's not some, you know, decision you make because it's a nice thing to do. It's an essential thing to do. So I just think the partnership between nonprofits and government needs to be rethought and equalized a bit.
Great. Maybe as a final question, just sort of reflecting on your time as a leader at UNH for 13 years, you know, what your leadership philosophy has been with all of the various agencies under your leadership, and also we were talking about the importance of transitioning in leadership, and you know, your thoughts on that.
Well, you know what, running a membership association is a little different than running, you know, your own agency. I have on my office door, I cut out there was a New Yorker cartoon of, I think it was President Obama herding cats. And I have that on my office door because to some extent it's like herding cats, running a membership organization. But I think the most important thing is, you know, relationships. You know, you can go to, you know, Barnes & Noble, if they still exist, or any bookstore, and you can see shelves and shelves of books on leadership. For me, it boils down to respectful relationships with people, doing what you say you're going to do, building trust. I guess that's the way I've managed my own staff over the years, and also dealt with the people. So I think, I don't know, it's hard to quantify, but I would say at least 75% of management is building relationships of trust. And you can call me old-fashioned, and that's why I'm leaving, and you know, let all these newfangled managers come on in and try something different. But no, so I think the transition is good. I mean, look, I'm part of a wave. I'm 63 years old. I'm a baby boomer. There are a lot of us who got into this business trying to make the world a better place back in the 70s, right? We were that era of wanting to change the world. I think a lot of us did do our best and ended up running a lot of these organizations. There's an exodus going on. We've had several retirements from our small system in the last couple of years. I think, 7 or 8 people in their 60s left. I think it's great that there's a whole new cadre of people. Yesterday I went down to one of our agencies and met with their new executive director, who's in his mid-40s, so impressive, and I said, great, they're going to introduce some new ideas and some new energies into this business. Fabulous. We did our bit. I think that for me, I want to take my accumulated wisdom and experience and still work to help younger people do this. I'm going to go to Hunter School of Social Work and try to help mold the next generation. But I think it's really a positive for the nonprofit field that we're going to have an infusion of new leaders. And they'll bring new ideas and new energy, as I said. I always think it's a mistake when old leaders hang around, lurk around in the shadows. So I'm gonna go off and continue to care about UNH and settlement houses for the rest of my life. It's in my heart. But let the new person fly.
Great. Well, thanks so much for being here and coming in and sharing your thoughts.